Welcome to Longevity Industries, presentation of the Destiny of Manufacturing podcast. I'm Dean Phillips, and I am your host for today. I'd like to thank the Precision Metal Forming Association and the PMA's Educational Foundation for their support of the show. I have with me today Kyle Riegel. He is, of course, with Schunk Carbon Technologies, and he is the product manager for the current transmission division. Welcome, Kyle.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here today. So right off the bat, what are some of the big changes you see coming down the road?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a fan of the show, listened to a couple episodes, and I want to echo the first thoughts of some of your other guests because I think there's some very clear things happening already underway within the manufacturing space that I want to acknowledge, of course, starting with automation. Been very popular for a while, what's out there and what we're seeing and how it's consistently improving. It's been exciting listening to some of your other guests talk about possibilities that I didn't even think were possible. I thought that was, a gap in automation, that they were able to start to really fill all those areas. Mm-hmm. And, there's some exciting space going on there. And something that drew me to the company I'm with now is what we're doing with automation and how we're, it can increase your, of course, higher quality, your looks, your concerns of risk and loss of what you might see and what you're doing, along with, of course, the ultimate process efficiency that comes with some of your automation. So to touch on that is important. I think we're going to continue to see strides there. I think we've seen so much. It's reaching to all spaces and sectors. It's not just for large scale manufacturing anymore. It's touching into, manufacturers that are in $10 million total sales. You'll have more and more automation hitting those plants because of the affordability of it. Another popular topic, of course, is your smart systems coming up, your information of things. I don't deal with that directly, but it's nice to be able to see that data available. Sometimes it can be overwhelming and too much data in some senses, but of course, that's exciting to see that change in manufacturing. But I know personally myself, I came from a little bit of a smaller scale manufacturing. So, single site location. I joined right out of college that did under $30 million in sales. And it's exciting to see what the changes for those type of industries will be as we move forward. I've seen, of course, a high demand for those type of products because everybody wants to make $1 million of something. Nobody wants to make the first 10,000 or so, or even the first 5 prototypes. So it's exciting to think of what might change in that space and what could happen. I had a thought about this the other night as we were kind of chatting before and ideas with it. And, being a younger guy myself in that millennial generation, it makes me think of what type of disruptor is going to come to this industry. And it made me really start to think, what happens when the gig economy hits into small scale manufacturing? Because I know right now, for me personally, I have trouble finding a product that I know I could go make in my garage for $5. I have trouble finding that for under $25, right? So I'm thinking, man, if there's a way this gig economy could really help and work in that space. You run, of course, quality issues and all sorts of logistics within the business structure, but there'd be some interesting things up there if they're going to see like the Uber of small scale manufacturing hit someday. So that's a random thought. I didn't really want to talk too much about it, but I thought that was kind of a fun thinking exercise to get started. And the area I do work in mostly, or I do help with mostly in personal time with volunteer work, is working with the next wave of manufacturing engineers, next wave of engineers in general, through various college education boards, a little bit of volunteer work with FIRST Robotics on FLL, so First Lego League, First Tech Challenge, and First Robotic Challenge, judging, coaching, mentoring those groups, and the local SME chapter I'm with sponsors some of those groups. And it's good to see because I think it's really developing the next wave of engineers as to be very strong, capable, well-suited for the entire business of engineering, not just the nuts and bolts behind the scenes of it. And I'm really excited about what that program and similar programs, because there's plenty of these other competitions out there, will have to offer. I know the generation of engineers joining the workforce in 5 years, and even the ones now, compared to myself joining the workforce about 10 years ago, I think are so much more well-equipped. And it starts on some level with the fact that they've never not had Google to use to their disposal. So it's going to be very impressive, some of the engineers and the minds that are going to join our community moving forward. So that's part I'm probably most excited about.
Yeah, I think you hit on a lot of key issues there that we'll kind of circle back to, but I'd like to hear a little bit about your background. So tell me how you got involved in manufacturing.
Yeah, I got involved with manufacturing. I was aware of Society of Manufacturing Engineers, so I'll do a little plug there. I joined as a member as soon as I turned 18, knowing that I would most likely end up in the manufacturing space with my career. From the Midwest, Iowa, born and raised, still live here in Des Moines, and manufacturing is a heavy part of our entire industry, right? Everyone thinks agriculture and farming, and that's of course very important here, but the manufacturing companies of the John Deeres of the world and such really do help drive some of our communities as well. So I knew I would end up in that space, and sure enough, it is what happened to me. I ended up going a small manufacturing route to start, and that's kind of where it went. So I always knew I wanted to be in engineering, and I think making things is kind of the next process to it. So that's where I came to, and then joined a company now that's over $1 billion euro organization globally, but our local manufacturing is relatively small. So we have both the agility of a small company here with the backing of a larger financial group behind us. So that's how it's worked, and I wouldn't do it any other way, to be honest. I think there's a whole lot of value in encouraging manufacturing, making things here in America to both a nationalist standpoint and just the value of life it can provide you, because it's an important need.
Right. Well, tell me if you agree with this, because this is kind of my perspective of how I've seen things. When you work for a small company and you start off in that, it gives you a very different perspective, because you got to wear a lot of hats in smaller companies. You have to do things in a very different way. And because of that, it kind of frames things in a different manner than if you started off at a big company and you had one task and that was your job and that's what you focused on. I think by having the bigger picture aspect that you're involved with intimately when you work for a small company, that it helps you to kind of see where you're going, as opposed to just seeing, hey, this is what I'm working on today.
Absolutely. And it would be a recommendation I have to the future workforce of engineers as well, that if you don't have, or if you're looking at different options, strongly consider that smaller company, because you get to wear multiple hats. Some say you have to, I say you get to. Mm-hmm. And what really helped me do is wearing hats both in quality, end of line testing, design, customer facing, pretty much everything from a small company side where our engineering group was about 10 or so employees, helped me identify what my true strengths were, where I wanted to go, what I liked doing more than just what I was good at. And that's what led to kind of where I am today with what I was doing, where I realized I really like working with customers more because of the process efficiency of it more than anything, versus having a middleman tell you what they say, and then I interpret that, and then I design it, and then he interprets that, and then what gets lost in translation. So that side of it I really enjoyed, and I definitely agree that from a smaller perspective, you can do so much more, you can experience so much more, and you can learn so much more. And it, along the way, creates some respect for all departments, because you understand the challenges that they go through, and the benefits and disadvantages to pretty much every phase of a company is, I thought, the most important part of coming from a small scale.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think that it provides a certain level of experience that it's hard to find anywhere else. If you work at a big company, you probably will not have an opportunity to do as many different things, and consequently, you don't have an opportunity to learn a lot of the mechanical. Let's say you're an electrical engineer, you get to learn more about the mechanical side of it in that operation than you would somewhere else. If you work for a big company, you may never do anything else but electrical drawings or work on electrical design.
Yeah, and I couldn't even imagine that either, to be honest. You hear stories of, the big company engineers. I haven't personally experienced it, where you focus so much on this one aspect of the design that you almost have blinders to the rest. And And then you see some, end user products where you can clearly tell that was the case, right? You're like, wow, who designed this, right? It's like probably someone whose only responsibility was designing this and not concerned about, this rotating piece right next to it or something. So, yeah, absolutely.
You said that you believe that automation is going to be a very impactful key to the future of manufacturing. What are some of the opportunities that you feel that automation is going to provide?
Yeah, I think what's key about it, and most of automation, especially the easy stuff, I'd like to think is fairly accomplished, right? With where we're at, where the industry's been in the past 10 years, realistically. The straightforward automation is there. As far as what it provides moving forward, I honestly don't have a great answer for you because there's so much innovation going on in that space, problem solve that, some of us don't even realize exist yet. That's what the exciting part of all of that is. And I don't know if AI is going to be heavily involved and really break down another barrier of what, automation can do for us. And this is automation in all sense, whether it's a picking machine or whether it's a full-on assembly or things like that. But the opportunities really are endless. So just to keep a pulse on that industry will be exciting to watch that develop. I'm not personally involved in it too much, but I know at times that I wish I could just tell a robot to go do something. So who knows when that future might end up being.
I think it's closer than many of us probably even realize, because when you look at, if you look back at the early computers and you think about in the days when you had to put a code in and information, you had to tell it to run a program on the early computers, as opposed to just using graphical user interfaces where you just click on something and it goes. We're kind of at that stage with robots now advancing where you don't have to know how to program everything in a robot now. You can drag it and move it where you want it to go, and that will define the range of motion. I think that, to your point, how much further off is it to say, go ahead and, you tell your Echo device to go, hey, Alexa, go run this, and it goes and runs that robot. It probably is not that far off to that point to execute that process. In fact, it may even go one step further and not need us to tell it. It's like, well, I know I got to do it. I know it's 8:00. I know it's time for me to run that job.
Right. Or it finds your statistical process control systems and it says we were out of alignment here, so I need to make this adjustment. And yeah, it's exciting to think what you can do. And it's exciting to know that this next wave of engineers, all of this will be so commonplace for them. Yeah. Everybody gets involved with coding and programming on some level, and not that it needs to be your main focus, but to understand how these robots think is such an advantage that I can't imagine any type of engineer coming out of school even today doesn't have at least a little bit of an understanding of this is the way a program works, and this is how I need to interact with it properly. These are the limitations to it specifically, and that's what's going to make it even smoother, right? So things that are easy for us to do are going to be complete child's play for the next workforce of engineering.
Speaking of the next workforce, what are some of the things that you're excited about as far as the skill set that the next generation brings with them that perhaps even yourself, you didn't have the luxury of having when you started?
Yeah, I think it starts with some hands-on experience. I know there are some, that were very fortunate to have good hands-on experience, get to work a CNC machine, before they graduate. But that's becoming common now on a high school level, right? And not just as a trade either, but the actual engineer knowing what they're doing. So I work with the University of Northern Iowa for their manufacturing engineering technology program. And even though they're not going out to be CNC machinists, the students are well versed in how a CNC machine works, that they know what to do as far as what design limitations, what we want to do for process efficiencies and so forth. So the hands-on experience is I think the first start. especially as some of this technology can get handed down to the educational level, or the education level has some good heavy funding to promote this, which is also becoming readily available. And the students can have, as much experience they can with building and physically wiring up something if you're going an electrical route. Physically programming, of course, everybody has access to a computer. Well, relatively in the U.S. here, I should at least say, almost every student's going to have access to a computer and be able to develop all these skills on their own. So it's not purely classroom driven anymore. And you can foster your passion in it. You can really take it to the next level. That's already been evident, and I think it's only going to grow even more with some of the possibilities of it. And as far as the skills that I'm probably the most jealous of, is I still remember back when I was a student, engineering was very, it was very math driven, right? And it's very scientifically driven. And I did a pretty good job. I went to Loras College. It's a liberal arts school. So we did have to work on presentation skills and everything of that nature, working with teams. But that's becoming such an emphasis on the college level, that the social skills and the communication skills, even for engineers, I think are going to be even higher than they were before. And they kind of have to be to keep up with the demand of the positions now. So it's not even about being very technically strong. It's more about communication skills. And I think those skills are developing much more than they were in the past. So the days of an engineer that just stares at their shoe hopefully are coming to an end.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that in my experience, I'm involved with Toastmasters, and the reason I got involved with it is improving communication skills. I think that's important. You have to be able to relay your message. How do you build the vision for the other person? And they have to be able to see that, and that relies on your ability to convey the message.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There's probably a million good ideas every day that get lost because the message can't be conveyed. So breaking down some of those barriers is important.
Yeah. And I think it's more critical for engineers to realize why it's important. Too many times they think, well, I don't need to do that. I don't need to communicate this. But whenever you go to pitch your idea to the head of engineering, and why your solution is the right solution or the best solution, it's all going to come down to your ability to convey that message.
Yeah, and hopefully convey it in a precise and succinct manner. I think that's the next level for me. I know I still see emails that are, like 1,000 words, and it's thinking, okay, let's take it easy on some of that, right? Like, what are we really trying to get across here and go for? So, yeah, but that's, of course, email compared to a verbal conversation, which nothing can beat. Thank goodness for Teams and other software these days that allow us to connect still.
Yeah, and I think that, kind of along that same line, one of the areas that I've really been excited with over the last few years when it comes to engineering is a higher degree of engagement with visual communications. So whether it's just using very simplistic displays, because the cost really has provided an opportunity for all of us as these big screens, these big TVs come down in price. Well, guess what? Those are the same TVs that they use in these plants to display whether it's a very simplistic pie chart or it's a very complicated dashboard with all kinds of data. In either case, we are visual people. We want to be able to make it in a simplistic way so that we can convey our message in a picture in 5 seconds rather than tell you what it says over 5 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. That is completely commonplace now, but 10 years ago it was almost, I don't know if it was new to do or maybe that's just my experience with it, but yeah, to actually share my screen and do all that previously, especially with loading times and processing of a CAD system at that time. Versus now it's just so easy to open it up. Here's my design. Let me spin it around. Let me show you what we're working on. And, what's your feedback? Okay, we'll change this. Okay, I'll change that real quick. How does that look? We're good to go. Those used to take weeks of back and forth, phone calls, emails, individual photos. Now can be accomplished so much quicker.
I think you hit on it right there. Collaboration. It's more collaborative than it used to be. It used to be, you show somebody a report or something like that, or you handed out a bunch of papers to everybody in the room, and then they'd give you feedback. Then you'd go and you'd work on it, and then you'd come back. Now it's much more of a collaborative environment, I see anyways, in most of the engineering think tanks, so to speak. When you get together, can we do this? And it's like, yeah, we can just we'll drag this. We can just click on it and move it. Whereas before you might have to go and write code for the next week in order to move something,
Yeah.
It's just
definitely something I try to offer to my customers, and I really value my suppliers, is the more collaborative we can be on something, the faster we can move. We can hit these lead times that everyone's being held to, or we can at least give supply chain a little bit of a break by improving our processes. And that's the real benefit of it, I think.
Yes. I think that's very impactful for many people, is the speed at which you can react by having a collaborative environment.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little bit more about your feeling about how like the gig economy kind of what that provides for us.
Yeah, I think it's just an interesting way to view the future of work in a lot of ways. When I was doing a master's program, I remember the professor talking about how it was probably by now was his theory, which isn't the case, but is becoming more true, where almost everyone starts to be more contract based than they are permanent employment. And that sounded kind of crazy to a guy like me who likes a little bit of routine. But at the same time, the principle behind it from a business perspective makes a lot of sense. When you can onboard quickly and you can have the right personnel for when you need it, you could essentially use this gig economy that is developing, not so much here in the Midwest, but it's definitely more on the coast, of course, that could be more valuable. That hasn't really hit manufacturing as far as I've seen, but it's hit so many other industries where you use consulting's always been big in manufacturing, but it's not quite that. It's more of the people actually doing the day-to-day necessary parts that we can see. So it's an interesting thought to see how that evolution will continue to hit manufacturing specifically. Mm-hmm. I know we want typically employees to come and, work their entire career with the company, and that's the best case scenario for everybody. But I think it's more practical to say, well, we want somebody to come in and help us develop this market or help us design this product or do that. So potentially short-term contracts would make more sense on what we're doing. And that ties potentially into a gig economy. Mm-hmm. And it could be something, this would be potentially a little crazy, but it could be something where, we balance our labor force with, everyone uses temp workers now, but you can balance your labor force saying, hey, we've got a really busy next few months coming up. So who's going to come work on this? And how are we going to get this particular job done for what we're seeing? There was an interesting company I came across that is working on this in the wind industry space, which I specialize in. Mm-hmm. And let's say you're at your wind farm and you have a few of this failure X. So you're going to need to solve this problem. Well, instead of having your typical crew do it, you bring in a couple specialists. They work on site for 1 month or so. They specifically work on this problem, and then they're off to the next job. And that's already happening in the wind space. And I think that would be interesting to see if that happens more in manufacturing as well. So it'd be interesting. And it might already be out there too. I don't see it personally from the companies I work with, but it's where the future's going. It's definitely something I could see because it's worker flexibility, which I think is a value to just about everybody. And as long as we can overcome the obstacles as far as onboarding and training and making sure they're qualified, I think there's a possibility for it. So,
sure.
Just unique what I had when I was thinking about where the future of manufacturing is, and thinking, man, that's the next thing. And it's a little bit inspired because I'm watching that Super Pump show right now. That's the history of Uber. So it kind of came from some of that too.
Well, it's it provides a level of scalability without the limitations that the resources that are required in order to necessarily get big really fast, when you can instead look at a workforce as, how do I get the right people in the right places doing the right things at the same time? It's too often that we think, oh, well, I need this many people and then I got to scale it. And what happens is the onboarding takes such a long time, and how long it takes to move things forward. If instead you can break it down to its simplistic components, I believe that we can get to an environment that can scale fast and be much better and more agile in the way we do things. It's what happens when things work correctly. Years ago, we talked about, even at SME, we had discussed the fact that having these committees had its own limitation, because again, all those things we just talked about, the fact that, onboarding, getting people familiar, transitioning from one group to another, all of those things take such a long time. Instead, move to a task-based system where they come in, work on a task, you move on. And that way you have the right people with the right skill set to be doing this, as opposed to more of a level of bureaucracy of doing it. And there's some positives in that. Most of the time it turned out to be negative, but that's an illustration. When you look at Uber and you look at all these other companies that work the same way, that scalability, how long does it take you to scale in a certain market? Well, if I had to hire all those people, it would have taken me longer to hire them than it would for me to actually get them out there.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's a big time waster for a lot of things.
It's a real challenge right now, hiring in general, as everyone's well aware of. And part of that is because of the onboarding process is so intensive, because you're trying to hire somebody that is your rock star for the next 20 years. Maybe you could streamline that process if you're just trying to have them be the rock star for the next 20 weeks, as an example.
Right.
Yeah. And I think you used the word that I use probably too much now, but agility is so important, and the flexibility and everything you do. So it's a skill set for current employees. I know I'm really proud of my team, and the flexibility we have to handle any type of situation, develop skills to handle situations and what we do. And I think that's a skill that's going to be really valuable and fully on display in the future, and even more important as everyone's required to do a little bit more moving forward.
I think it provides the proper context for HR managers of where they're trying to go. If you're trying to still focus on the wrong things for what you're convincing somebody to come work for you, if you convince somebody to come work for you, it's probably not because of the things you think are important. Is money important? Money's always important. It's like saying price isn't important. Price is always important, but it's not the main thing. Having flexibility, providing the proper workforce. I mean, right now you can drive a fork truck and not be there. You can drive it remotely. Okay. Well, that's probably very appealing to a certain group of people that don't want to come into an office, don't want to work a static schedule. Maybe you've got kids. Right away, when you have kids, that could be very detrimental. Maybe if I had to leave at 7 a.m. and come home at 4 or 5 o'clock, that's limiting to me. Instead, if I could work remotely, I work from 6 or 5:30 until 7, get the kids off to school. At 8 o'clock, I'm back working, and then I work until 2 o'clock when I have to go pick them up or whatever. It provides opportunities to think outside of the box and create a position without getting hung up on the wrong things, getting hung up on, well, this has to be done this way because that's the way we've always done it. So
yeah, Famous last words there. Yeah.
So what other new technologies do you see kind of taking hold, and how does that change what we do?
New technologies taking hold.
Yeah. Like, for instance, you mentioned IoT earlier. What things do you see that are happening in IoT, and how is that changing the way we look at things?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing when you look at information of things in general is the amount of, this is redundant here, but information that becomes available. Things you didn't even know that you could check, you can now monitor. You can find correlations to, what trends, of course, can lead to future forecasts and demands. And, the way some of our smart thinking, it honestly even gets a little bit above me, but the excitement there that we can start to track this and do it. And then as somebody who does get involved with it to a certain degree, the next step of actually doing it is a significant challenge that will be interesting to see how, we can best optimize moving forward. So you can collect all the data you want. You can have all the data in the world, but not knowing what to do with it is going to be the biggest thing. So it's almost, I'd say, the way we could best get a user interface to that system. I know this is really general terms here, but the way we can make all that more user friendly is going to be the next big breakthrough, I think, in the industry we'll see. So that a guy like me, who's technically capable, but not a computer scientist by any means, can really best harvest this information.
Right. Well, I think when you say that, I think you say that you're trying to make it simplistic, but I think that that's very critical to the adoption. Even if you look back on computers, what made computers adapted for the common person was the simplicity of it. And why is it? What's that?
Complex for anyone to understand. Yeah.
Yes. And if you can do that, then there's no question about it. There's that people will adopt it if it's easy. If it's complicated, they're not going to adopt it.
Yeah. Yep.
Do you,
Yep.
now you said when you were working with the FIRST Robotics side of it, what things did you find what was your aha moment working with FIRST Robotics that you said, wow, this can change people's lives?
What I really enjoyed about it was, make sure I don't come off saying this the wrong way or anything, but I played a lot of sports growing up, was an athlete in a couple of different areas and always just loved playing and competing. Mm-hmm. And they've taken that same passion that you can put into sports that I think everyone loves so much. You can see yourself develop and get better, perform better. I used to swim. I trained hard. I would swim faster. All of that starts to apply now, but in an engineering setting, because as I program this robot, at first it doesn't go that fast, and then I change this design and something breaks on it, but then I change this and now it works. And you get that satisfaction that you receive in any type of competition, what you do, and they are competitions as well. And so there's just a whole lot of camaraderie. The teamwork side of it's very important. You can't do any of this stuff on your own. These are way too complex of projects. I think that's the part that really gets me as an aha. Is this is almost like the next version of athletes, and not that it's a physical thing necessarily, but the same concepts arise there. And I think that's really important to have that outlet, especially as a student. That's something you can put and develop a passion into and really enjoy, and you enjoy getting better at it. You can see yourself getting better at it because you can see the first robots you designed or simple machines you designed, and then at the end of the season, this complex robot that does multiple tasks and has different drive systems and laser tracking on it, and all your teams coming together to make that work. It's got to be pretty rewarding for the students. So that's always the aha part I get as a judge, seeing the end of it. As a coach, seeing throughout the entire process, it was nice to witness. But really, as a judge, when you watch it all come together, it's almost like, wow, how did you guys possibly do this? This is amazing. So yeah, I think that's important for the students learning and growing and understanding, and just important for personal life as well.
Yeah. I can tell you this, I didn't do FIRST Robotics, but I've been involved with VEX Robotics. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I could tell you, if you ever get involved in one of those programs, when you see it applied and you see these kids and how passionate they are, it will completely erase anything that you may have had as a preconceived notion that these kids aren't passionate today, they're not this, they're not that. If you go to these things and you see these kids, it is inspiring to go to. So if you have the opportunity, please take advantage, whether it's the Lego or FIRST Robotics or Vex or any of the other ones. Please take an opportunity to do that, because it can change your life. I mean, people that were there from different manufacturing companies when we had an event, they left there having a completely different attitude about, the workforce of tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's easy to see, worst case scenarios of some of the next workforce, but you go to these events, especially, as someone who's judged, and you judge their workbooks and their log of hours, you hear them talk about how much effort they put into this. There's aspects of FIRST. I mean, I'm not trying to promote FIRST more than any others. I think they're all great. But there's a community aspect to it. There's a development aspect to it. There's, cooperation, I think, is a word that they use, where you want to all work together and build something better together while still being competitive in nature. That's fantastic, right? That's exactly what I think we love to see from our industries in general too. Let's all rising tide raise all boats.
Yep.
But of course, there's still a competition side to it. But let's work together and all benefit from each other. And yeah, when you talk about it, and it's a similar thing. You hear this phrase that nobody wants to work anymore. But if you look at these robotics teams and the amount of work they put in, it's fantastic. And I think what they do that makes it work is they make it fun. They make it enjoyable. So it's, how can we adapt those same type of things to our workforce now? How can I make it more enjoyable for my employees and make it easier for them, and make sure that they have satisfaction in what they're doing? I think that's always important.
Yeah, and engaging it is too. So yeah. Well, Kyle, hey, we are just about out of time here. I want to thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thank you.
Go out and make it a great day, everybody.